Welcome back to another episode of ROC Boys football, previewing the college football playoff matchups. And we're starting with our Michigan Wolverines as we play TCU. This, in my mind, is a dream scenario for Michigan. If you're asking me out of the top four teams, who do we match up the best and who probably is the worst of the four teams, it's probably TCU. I think this is a great matchup for multiple reasons. Excited to get into it. Before we do, though, just want to say thank you guys for the support you guys have shown the channel, especially you Michigan fans. We've been talking a lot of Michigan on the podcast. You guys know we rock with Michigan. Very, very good win. Big Ten champs. Once again, back to back. So we do appreciate all the support. If you like the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, let's get into the matchup. Michigan, TCU. What are your early takes on this matchup?
Yeah, and just to echo you, this is certainly what I think most Michigan fans wanted. I think Ohio State's certainly a dangerous team. Obviously, Michigan beat them pretty good, but Ohio State's dangerous. And I think this is the scenario you want to hopefully end up with a Georgia or Ohio State in the playoffs or playoff final, assuming you can get past the TCU team that, although I don't think is the best of the four, I think they're way better than everybody else thinks. That's for sure.
Yeah, you have been on the team. We've bet on TCU a lot. We like this TCU team. They've been utterly disrespected by Vegas and kind of disrespected with this line. They're 9.5-point underdogs against Michigan. Let's start with how these two teams match up against one another, and we got to start with that Michigan run game. I mean, that's how Michigan breads their butter, and it always seems to kind of you wear those teams down, and then the second half, like against Ohio State, like against Purdue last night, that's when you start hitting those big runs. You look at TCU, they play kind of like that 3-3-5. They don't really load the box. I love their linebackers. Guys like Jamoy Hodge, D. Winters, they're very good linebackers, but I do think that this Michigan team is going to be able to get movement. And like you saw yesterday, when you get Donnie Edwards one-on-one in space against any linebacker in the country, I'm taking Donovan Edwards, and I think they're going to be able to kind of consistently get back to that like 5-6 yard kind of grind you down run game that we haven't really seen. We've seen more of the explosive run game, not necessarily the grind you down run game. I think Michigan's going to be able to get back to that, keep that TCU offense off the field, and really just wear this TCU front.
That's going to be the interesting thing, because everybody in the past few weeks has been trying to play Michigan, load the box, 4 or 5 down linemen, and then 3, 4 linebackers. So the strategy has been to obviously take away the run game, and JJ starting to come on and play a little better and make expose teams for doing it. But I do wonder, like, can TCU do that? Because their defense is so much predicated on not doing what like Ohio State did or Illinois did.
Yes,
they are what you said, a 3 down line and in a kind of a soft shell zone. So I don't know that this team can transition into being that down lineman play. Like, that's just not how they play. And not how they own, but like it's just light years away from what they do. So I do wonder if they can flip the script and try. Because if they let Michigan pound on them, I think that's good for Michigan.
And we've seen like the TCU, they've been in certain aspects good against the run. Like against Texas on the road, they held Bijan Robinson to a very, very modest workload in game. I just think how Michigan likes to move the ball, and I don't think you'll see TCU. We've almost never seen TCU load the box. They pretty much play that same formation, the same look every time, and kind of try to limit those big plays. Michigan's going to be trying to force the envelope and run the football. And then if you do walk that safety in the box, and again, I'm not saying it's a blessing at all that Blake Corum is hurt, but it has forced J.J. McCarthy to make some more throws down the field. They've pushed him to do that in the last 2 games, in the biggest 2 games of the year, against Ohio State, against Purdue in the Big Ten championship. Like, J.J. McCarthy's been excellent.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that Michigan's offense now, to me, looks far more dangerous than it did coming into the Illinois game, because now I think JJ's getting extraordinarily confident in what he's doing. I think it's just hard to build a rhythm when you're throwing the ball less than 15 times a game, which is pretty typical for the first 10 or so weeks of the season, just because of how good the running game was and how much we could have relied on Blake Corum. And now that teams have been more committed to stopping it and Blake Corum's been out, you're starting to see JJ emerge. You're starting to see the wide receivers, I think, play better, and you're starting to see the tight ends, obviously, play. I mean, they've played really well all year, but getting Colston Loveland to make some huge plays that he's done in the past couple of weeks, I think it's massive for Michigan.
Now, on the flip side, how does this Michigan defense match up against one of the most – I mean, they led the Big 12 in explosive plays. They like to push the ball down the field. And we've said this about TCU a lot. They have like such a complete set of wide receivers. They kind of have some bigger targets, like Quentin Johnson, in my mind, the best wide receiver in college football. They have some very, very good tight ends and some bigger bodies to work the middle of the field. And they also have some absolute speedsters like Darius Davis and Tay Barber. They have a lot of weapons on this field. The one thing that you saw TCU become a little vulnerable in is when you put pressure on Max Duggan. You don't see a lot of blitzing in the Big 12. The defense you see in the Big 12 is primarily predicated on kind of stopping the big play and then holding the teams to field goals in the red zone. Michigan can rush the passer just about as good as anyone in the country. You saw that against Purdue last night, I should say. The key to keep stopping Max Duggan is make him uncomfortable and then don't let him extend plays outside the pocket. You look back and how did they kind of get back into that game against Kansas State? Max Duggan was creating with his legs. If you can keep him in the pocket, Michigan hasn't really played a very mobile quarterback like Max Duggan. They'll have to be able to scheme that up. I really think Michigan matches up against this TCU offense quite well.
Yeah, and that's been one of the revelations for sure. Is TCU has played way better up front than I think a lot of people thought they were going to.
Yes.
But I do think Michigan's going to be as good of a front as they've seen. I mean, Texas is probably the next. Texas is really good in their defensive line. But Michigan right now, I mean, you got to think you're going to get Mike Morris back. And now Michigan's rattled off 3 straight wins against really good teams, Illinois, Ohio State, and Purdue, without Mike Morris, who previously had been by far the best defensive lineman, certainly the most productive. And you're starting to see the new guys emerge. Yabi Oki playing really good football. Braden McGregor in place of Morris playing really well. And then the young D tackles along with Mozzie Smith and Jenkins, like all starting to really contribute. And if they can do that, like they can do what Kansas State did in stifling that offense, where they were very constant pressure, not letting TCU get into any rhythm. And pretty much a lot of TCU's offense was throw the ball up and see if you can make a play with Q Johnson.
And it worked a couple times, but that's about as rattled as
you can't win doing that, though.
That's about as rattled as we've seen Max Duggan in that TCU offense look for 3 quarters. Like they really could not get much consistency going. They had a touchdown on the first drive, and then they kind of just went cold. You saw that similar when they played Texas, but you haven't seen that most of the year. I mean, this TCU offense has been a juggernaut for most of the year. I think we have the linebackers to spy Max Duggan as well and kind of keep him in the pocket, limit the ability for him to run. If I had one big worry, is what has Michigan struggled with a little bit is those elite, bigger wide receivers. Like as good as DJ Turner has been for us, he's struggled playing the ball in the air against bigger wide receivers.
The X factor is if we had Will Johnson going on Kean Coleman, and that's the only guy who I really thought just beat us straight up. I mean, Marvin Harrison had some plays and some guys from Ohio State, but it wasn't consistent like that, like Keon Coleman was doing in the first half. But I mean, Will Johnson, a big physical freshman corner who wasn't playing a ton in the early portion of the year and is now very much emerged as probably the number 1 corner, I think he gives us a chance against Quentin Johnson because he's got the size, he's got the athleticism, and he plays the football in the air, along with the fact that, frankly, our safeties have played really good football against not allowing huge plays, especially Ron Moore. He's a great
and that'll probably be like one of the biggest matchups that you have in this game is you're putting if we wanted to take your advice and Jesse Minter, the defense coordinator, want to take your advice, you're putting an 18-year-old kid on Quentin Johnson, probably the freakiest, most physical wide receiver in the whole entire country. And then whether he's up for the challenge or not is kind of going to be one of the bigger stories of the game. I think the best way you can kind of neutralize those wide receivers and those down the field threats is getting after Max Duggan. I think that's the best way you can do it. And I think that's what you're going to need from Michigan. And again, we've seen Michigan struggle with the pass rush. We've also seen them be really, really good with their pass rush. They're going to have to be very, very good with their pass rush, kind of similar to what Kansas State did against TCU yesterday and kind of throw Max Duggan off the spot because he, as good as Max Duggan is and as good of as just a warrior, and it's not always pretty with him, but he gets the job done. And there's a reason that they are 12-1. He wins football games. When he gets under pressure, like he misses high a lot and he's not very accurate with his throws. When he has a clean pocket, that's when he starts to cook. Michigan is going to need to be able to get him off the spot and be disruptive. And one other thing I want to add is TCU, as much as we want to talk about Max Duggan, and you take a look at what Max Duggan's done, completing 65% of his balls for 3,300 yards, they've also have a running back in Kendra Miller who's run the ball for 1,300 yards, 6.2 yards per carry. Michigan is the best team against the run, only allowing 2.9 yards per carry to opposing running backs. I don't see them having much success. They didn't have much success against Kansas State running the ball. Michigan has been very, very good against the run all year. I think you're going to see a lot of 3rd and longs, and then Michigan just get that pass rush going and get off the field.
Yeah, and that's going to be the key. If they can just dominate them up front, which I think Michigan has the capability to do, just because as good as TCU's played up front, I don't think they've seen anyone besides Texas and Texas.
When they've seen the good defensive lines like Kansas State and Texas, they haven't looked great.
Yeah. So I'm hoping they can expose them. And then obviously the other side is, can they just not allow too much from Quinn Johnson, not allow him to take over the game in any way.
Not allow him to have those like big time impact plays. Quinn Johnson is going to catch the ball. He's going to be a difference maker. He's too good not to be. Don't let him change the game. In terms of don't let any 75-yard touchdown passes. Like that is what he does. That's what he specializes in, those verticals, playing the ball in the air and then being good after the catch. You just got to keep him at bay, kind of like they did with Marvin Harrison Jr. You're not going to be able to stop him, but can you slow him down a little bit and then just kind of get off the field on 3rd down? I think that's going to be the biggest story of this game. We're obviously not going to do too many picks for Michigan. Michigan coming in as 9.5-point favorites. What is your take on that spread here?
It's a big line. I think it's a disrespectful line just because I am a TCU. It could be because, like, my thing is I'm very anti-Bama getting in, so it's basically was going to be Bama or TCU in a sense. And I honestly think TCU's playing like they've played. I get it. They've not been dominant most of the year, but they won 12 games in a good conference. So I don't know. This feels like they're giving Michigan a fair amount of love, but I also don't think they're that great.
This is when you figure out how good these conferences are. Like, how good is the Big 12 actually? They've kind of been just cannibalizing each other. You're seeing the best team from the Big 12 play the best team from the Big 10. How good are these teams? How good are the conferences? You're going to kind of get those answers in this game. I personally, I wouldn't love betting Michigan to cover almost 10 points just because I think this TCU team is also pretty solid. That being said, from a matchup standpoint, what Michigan does on the offense and defensive side of the ball, I think does match up very, very well against TCU. So if you wanted to take Michigan to cover the 10 points, I wouldn't tell you not to, but this TCU team can hit the explosive plays. They can put points up on the board and they can put points up fast. It's going to be a good game. It's going to be kind of 2 different teams. Like, one team likes to hit the explosive plays. One team likes to grind you down a little bit. Which team is going to come out on top? I think it'll be Michigan. Obviously, Vegas thinks it'll be Michigan, but it's going to be a very fun game. And again, I wanted to keep it short with you guys. Wanted to talk a little bit about these college football matchups, though. Appreciate you guys checking us out. As usual, if you do like the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.